What is the most unexpected way someone you know became wealthy? A friend of mine trademarked a name and bought a domain for a small business. Soon after, a major sneaker company developed a shoe with the same name. Instead of fighting him, they bought all of his IP, intellectual property, for a substantial sum, though he never disclosed the exact amount. My friend took some of that money and invested it in his brother-in-law's business, which was a management software for industrial marine commerce. That investment took off, and my friend made millions. He's just an average guy, not particularly ambitious, intelligent, or business savvy, just a good guy with incredibly good luck. And I swear, some people are just born with luck. Imagine getting rich based off of a coincidence that a company wanted to name their sneakers that specific name. Story 2. There was a quiet chap that I worked with, unassuming and never talked much except about football and his team. I was having coffee with him one day and he mentioned he had received a letter from a solicitor and was going to see them later. It turned out a distant relative had passed away, and as he was the only living relative, he was inheriting their estate. Sometime later, he discovered that he had inherited 5,000 acres and a building site development that already had 6 houses nearly complete, with another 6 under construction. The estate was worth millions and continues to deliver income. He bought me a beer. Story 3. I worked at Microsoft on a project called HoloLens. It was a fun project, but after 10 years, the price was still too high, and the headset was still too bulky. Microsoft eventually decided to concede the consumer hardware market to Apple and others, so the project was canceled. My job was to make games for HoloLens in a tiny studio within Microsoft called LXP. When the studio was dissolved, the lead left to create a startup and invited me to join. "What's the project?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "We'll figure it out together." 7 other guys said yes. They had savings or wives who had made good money. I didn't have that luxury, so I said no. They named the company Against Gravity because the HoloLens prototype was called Grave, which I thought was funny. A year later, I saw they were making a VR chat app that they were giving away for free. I felt good about my decision to pass on being the 8th member of the studio. The art looked like developer placeholders. A few years after that, I heard my old PM Nick's voice on the radio during my commute. He was a guest on NPR's Planet Money talking about how that little startup was now worth over $3 billion. Apparently, they had put the VR app Rec Room on mobile, and it was now considered a Roblox competitor. So they did indeed figure it out together. Story 4. I had a distant family member who worked at a gas station cafe. There was an old grumpy man who came in for coffee every day, and nobody liked him. She went out of her way to be friendly, asking how his day was and sitting to chat with him when it wasn't busy. They lived rurally, so sometimes no one would come in for a long time. And one day he passed away, and she learned she was to inherit his money, which amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had no family and deeply appreciated her kindness, so he left her everything. She used the money to build a house and purchase a construction company. Story 5. The guy who invented smart food popcorn lives in my town, and we have some mutual friends. The unexpected part of his story is that popcorn wasn't what he was originally marketing. So he had come up with an idea for a resealable chip bag. When he was pitching his product to investors, he made some popcorn to put in the bags to demonstrate how they worked. The company hated the bag concept. After all, why would they want to prevent chips from going stale? That would cut into the sales of more chips. However, they loved his popcorn, a stoner's blend of popcorn and white cheddar cheese. PepsiCo now owns Smart Food and he's worth millions. Story 6. I heard from some coworkers that a former colleague who had been laid off about a year prior won first place in a World Series of Poker WSOP event in Las Vegas. It was a $1,500 buy-in with about 1,300 participants and a $315,000 first place prize. It's not crazy money compared to the main event, but it is very impressive nonetheless. I look him up from time to time on the WSOP website. It looks like he goes to Vegas every few months to compete in several events, placing well enough to pay for his trips and take home a few $1,000s, but not enough to quit his job. Nothing has been quite as impressive as that first big win. Story 7. My ex's mom and stepdad started taking care of an elderly couple on their street, taking them meals, helping around the house, and driving them to doctor's appointments. Eventually, the couple passed away. A little while later, my ex's mom and stepdad received a call from an attorney informing them that the couple had left everything to them. They didn't think much of it initially. They were living in a small house in a modest neighborhood just as the elderly couple had. The couple didn't own anything flashy. They had old beat-up cars, lived in a small home, and never went on expensive vacations. To all appearances, they lived just above the poverty line. Then the lawyer revealed the truth. The couple had left them tens of millions of dollars. I don't know the exact sum, but they told us it was in the tens of millions. Needless to say, they live a very different life now. Story 8. My aunt lived in a very old neighborhood with modest houses and older cars. I wouldn't say it was poverty, but it was humble. One of her neighbors was an elderly man who was partially deaf and battling cancer. My aunt always walked by his house and noticed he would never come out to get his newspaper, so she started bringing it up to the door for him. Eventually, she began collecting his mail and taking him to his doctor's appointments. He had a couple of children, but apparently they were never around and never helped. They became close friends. After his appointments, she would sometimes take him out for pie and coffee. Once he told her he wanted to be useful to her, so she let him watch her dog for 2 days while she went out of town. The dog ended up fighting a squirrel in the backyard, and when the neighbor tried to separate them, the squirrel bit him. She had to take him to get a rabies shot. They both had a good laugh about that later. After a couple of years, he passed away. She didn't expect anything, as he didn't live a flashy life or own anything nice. However, she soon discovered he had changed his will 3 years prior to include her. She inherited a massive estate in Hawaii and a small yacht. His children hired lawyers and tried to make the situation quite ugly because she is very religious and didn't feel right about taking the entire inheritance. She ended up giving them most of the estate. They settled the matter by giving her a couple of $1 million. In the end, it wasn't a bad deal, plus she had gained a wonderful friend. Story 9. My best friend from high school grew up poor as dirt. When his brother got married, he fooled around with a bridesmaid he met at the wedding, which eventually turned into a long-distance relationship. It turned out he had knocked her up the night of the wedding. Her family was extremely traditional, so she wanted to get married. He agreed, mostly because he wanted to be near his child. She moved to where we live and they got married. Her father owns a massive company in the Northeast. After a year or so, he missed his daughter enough to offer to buy them a house, pay all their moving expenses, and gave my friend a job with his company. For the last 20 years, my friend has had a job where he does very little, gets paid extremely well, and has no debt at all. Story 10. A kid who lived down the street from me growing up tried to get me to invest in buying domain names for established businesses that hadn't hopped on the internet train yet. This was in the mid-90s and he wanted us to use our paper delivery money. I declined because I wanted to spend my money on dumb crap. I don't know how much he made from those domains, but it was significant enough to sequentially create several startups in web hosting and eventually cloud storage. Each company he started, he sold for more and more money. Now, according to a Google search, he is worth over $300 million. Story 11. Two of my best friends randomly married girls who are obscenely wealthy, at least to me. One girl's father invented a medical device and makes millions in royalties every year. My friend knew she had money when they got married but didn't realize exactly how much until afterward. He contributes about 20% of his pay to the household and the rest is basically fund money because they aren't worried about retirement. He squirrels away some money on his own in case of an emergency, but they will probably retire before 50. My other buddy married a girl who inherited a business from her family. Her father had made a couple of million and then, quote, sold the business to her over several years. She was a workaholic and bought him out after just a few years for a couple of million. She then grew it into a multi-million-dollar business and sold it to an outsider for several million more. They put 100% of that money away and now just work to pass the time so they don't touch their nest egg too early. On another note, a family member of mine randomly worked their way into a C-suite executive role at a multi-billion-dollar company. There was no nepotism or prestigious MBA from Harvard involved, just a hell of a job climbing the ladder. Their salary is about $250,000 a year. They get a 25 to 30% bonus, sometimes more once a year, and they additionally earn 10 to 15% in stock options that vest over several years. Their total compensation is about $400,000 every year. They once told me that they do their best to live off their yearly bonus and save 100% of their salary. Story 12. This didn't make me rich or provide screw you money, but back around 2010, I wanted to learn the basics of mobile development and created a flashlight application. Over its life, which lasted just a few years, the app generated about $80,000. It was less than 2 hours of work and I had zero ambition for it. Much of that money went into my kid's 529 college savings account. My oldest graduates this year and that money will pay for their college. It was a decent amount invested at a good time, and while more has been added since, it was never in such large quantities as that initial windfall. Story 13. A friend of mine started doing yard work for the owner of his shop when the owner got sick. Slowly, the owner opened up to him and let him into his house, which he was very embarrassed about because he was a hoarder. My friend kept it all quiet so as not to embarrass him and cleaned it all up. As the man's sickness got worse, my friend kept him company and visited him often, and they developed a true friendship. My friend was one of the only people this man had left at the end. When he passed, my friend found out there was a special clause in the will that allowed him to buy the house for pennies on the dollar. Now, my friend owns a house in an affluent neighborhood worth close to $1 million, but he pays very little for it. Story 14. I have a friend who is an autistic loner type who never showed any entrepreneurial traits. He just worked at a large company as a regular engineer. At work, he befriended a manager, an older guy, an old-school, obnoxious type with no formal education, who got everything through connections, made a lot of money, and wanted to start his own business. The guy was looking for a business partner who would complement his boldness and charisma with professional knowledge and education. He chose my friend, who had the skill set but was also young, broke, and inexperienced, so he wasn't a threat to the guy. They created a synergistic doer and thinker duo, like a cartoon with a love-hate relationship vibe, and have been making millions running their own company for several years now. Story 15. A bunch of guys I worked with had a lottery pool in the mid-90s. They did that for about a year and somehow won a second or third prize, which they divided up. I remember one guy paying off his wife's school loans with the money while a couple of other guys got new cars. A few of them decided to do a little work outside the office and got interested in e-commerce and interactive websites, technology that was just starting to take off. Their idea was to provide an online listing site for vacation home rentals, searchable by location and text, and to charge landlords a listing fee. They sent paper mail advertisements down to vacation areas and bought some online ads. Travel agency websites also agreed to host some ads and links. Traffic went up steadily, especially after they registered the site with search engines like Yahoo, Lycos, and AltaVista. After a couple of years, they made back their startup costs, and for a few more years, it actually became what they had hoped for, an income supplement. They showed up at work tired sometimes as they were constantly improving the site. By then, though, they seemed only minimally interested in their office work. By 1998 and 1999, all of those lottery guys were gone. A friend in the group later told me he retired after the site was bought for millions by a major company. He was not yet 40 years old. Story 16. He had a small surf shop in the UK. In the 80s, on a surf trip to Australia, he ended up talking with some Aussies who had their own board short brand called Billabong. He made a deal to use their name, which allowed him to print and sell t-shirts and board shorts with the brand logo from his shop. He also struck a few deals with other surf shops in Tenerife and Portugal. The Aussie company grew larger and branched out to Asia and South Africa, eventually becoming so big that they looked into an IPO on the ASX. However, before they could go public, they realized that this guy they had made a deal with owned the exclusive rights to their name and logo within Europe. They bought the name back from him, and the next day, he turned up to open his surf shop in a black Lamborghini Diablo. Story 17. Years ago, my dad's cousin and all the farmers in the area lost their cotton crops to unseasonable rain. The other farmers took their insurance payouts and gave up on the season. My dad's cousin, against better advice, decided to do a second planting. There was just enough growing season left and all the conditions lined up just right, so he got a hell of a cotton crop out of it. Being the only farmer in the area with a significant crop that year, he was able to sell at a much higher price. He leveraged his profits to buy the cotton gin the following year, and then used those profits to buy more land and farms. He has since bought and invested in a number of other things. For a fella who started as a small-time cotton farmer in the 1970s, he is living a very cushy retirement. Story 18. My father grew up poor in a shack on stilts in Ecuador. He managed to get a scholarship to the US in the 1940s where he studied geophysics. After graduating, he got a job with Standard Oil and met and married my mother, an NC native. They wound up in Cuba before, during, and after Castro, eventually settling in Florida after being ejected from Cuba. The first thing my parents wanted to do didn't turn out, so they turned to their second idea with only the $3,000 they had saved. They never got a loan for anything, they got lucky, and they knew it. The venture they rode to their fortune was Chifle's plantain chips. When my father passed away in 2000s, he was a multi-millionaire. He and my mother both credited incredible luck and hard work all the way. I always said they lived the Horatio Alger story. Story 19. This happened to a former friend of mine. She lived in her family home in upstate New York and worked as a trainer at a local gym. Her neighbor was an elderly woman who had been an editor for the New York Times. She had no husband or children, a first-wave career woman from the 1950s and 60s. Anyway, this former friend started running errands for her and then cooking her meals. The woman paid her, but not much. My friend was happy to do it because she liked her and felt compassion for her. She eventually became her home health aide and took care of her right up until she passed away. I think you can tell where this is going, but there is a little twist. When the woman passed away, my former friend found out she had been left the bulk of the estate, including the house. However, it turned out this woman wasn't just a middle-class former editor. She was from a wealthy real estate family. My friend apparently collapsed into a chair when she was told just how much she was inheriting. She's never told anyone exactly how much, but the whispers put it in the low nine figures. No one sees her anymore. She's moved to the south of France and cut off communication with most of us. One question we all had was, why didn't this rich old lady hire a team of nurses to take care of her? I guess money can make people weird. Story 20. My cousin co-owned a factory manufacturing personal protective equipment (PPE) through a joint venture with several businessmen in China. Our family is Asian but not Chinese. When he told the family he had an opportunity to invest around $100,000 in China with several good friends, many of us thought it was a bad idea. We had very little idea of what it was like for a foreigner to own a business in China, but we knew from conversations with other business owners that there were many obstacles. The factory eventually lost so much money that the other co-owners exited the partnership, leaving him as the sole owner with a lot of debt in the 8-figure range. Then COVID happened. His factory became very profitable literally overnight. Face masks were especially lucrative as they became significantly more expensive at the beginning of the pandemic due to a massive surge in demand. His factory produced and exported close to 1 billion masks in the first year alone, not including the other PPE they were producing. He has since sold the factory and is living a very comfortable lifestyle. Story 21. A friend of mine got, I don't want to say wealthy, but certainly well off due to a few interesting things. We were at uni together studying different subject areas, but we were part of the same club in society. 14-odd years later, we all still meet up regularly. Anyway, he went on to do a master's degree, and when he graduated, he got a golden handshake from a massive company, which he immediately used as a deposit on a house. He was paid fairly well and most of the work was offshore, so he spent more than 6 months away. He didn't have to pay taxes or as much tax, I'm unsure. So when he finished a job or had time off, he'd head out traveling to cool places. While he was working there, he picked up every training course on every bit of equipment he could. Then he was made redundant and created his own company, basically contracting to do the same work he was doing before. He was immediately signed to a contract with that same company at 3 or 4 times what he was getting paid previously. One of the main reasons was that as the industry moved on and equipment was upgraded, there were only a handful of people around who could decently operate some of the older gear. It was more efficient for them to pay him a ton for a specific job than to spend 8 months getting someone else trained on it. He's a really nice and humble bloke, though always has time for people, is up for a laugh, and always has a few crazy stories to tell. Story 22. Counter-Strike weapon skins. Back when CSGO first started accepting user submissions into the game, I told my friend, who is a talented 3D artist, to look into it. Both of us played CSGO anywhere, and we were about 18 years old at the time, so we had nothing to lose. His first ever submission was accepted, and Valve started paying him $25,000 per month for his weapon skin every month. He had to establish himself as a business for tax reasons. Shortly after this, he had another submission accepted and was pulling in anywhere between $40,000 and $50,000 per month. 10 years later, he's bought a nice house outright, drives a supercar, and is pretty well set for life. He still gets paid, although not as much anymore, as the income gradually dwindled. He and I are still close friends, and he's done a lot for me over the years, so I'm super happy it worked out for him the way it did. Story 23. A former coworker of mine got on the ground floor of the NFT craze a few years ago. After he got fired, he divorced his wife and spent his time day trading instead of looking for a job. He met a guy on Discord who convinced him to buy a few Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs. A few months later, the NFT market, specifically Bored Ape, exploded. He sold his NFTs for a crap ton of money before it crashed and put that money into other crypto assets. It low-key makes me angry. The guy essentially failed upward. He was just in the right place at the right time and was willing to take a stupid risk that wouldn't have paid off 99% of the time. And if you're learning a thing or two from the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 24. My uncle worked for a big company in the 70s, think Kodak or Bell Telephone big, and they decided to close out a very small division that was not making enough money. He worked in that division and decided to buy out the tech to start his own company. The cost was 1 year's salary for him, and it was a big deal for the family. Many relatives added a few $1,000s to make up the total as investors. It provided a nice living for his family, and the family members were all paid back. Then in the 90s, looming Y2K worries caused people to look at older tech to review and back up things that were potentially going to haywire. They did 100x the business from 1995 to 2000, and in 2002, there was another tech-related reason for the service to be needed. He ended up selling the whole shebang for $100 million. A neighbor invented a very specific rendering process used in video game graphics in the early 2000s, and it is licensed to major game companies. It is a patented technology, so he is still collecting checks and has been effectively retired since then. He is the guy I point to when people are worried that all their kids want to do is play video games, because that is absolutely how this guy started. Story 25. I worked for a major vape juice manufacturer about 10 years ago. It had huge potential and was at the head of a booming new industry. They made insane amounts of online sales, but the business was started by just two guys in a garage and it blew up too fast for them. They went through 4 CEOs in 4 years, spent tons of money on harebrained ideas and training seminars, suffered from rampant nepotism, and hired and fired seemingly at random. It was a real mess. They brought in a new CEO one time and he immediately laid off a group of about 25 people. For some reason, they all received 2 months of severance. One of the guys I knew in passing put his entire severance, about $2,500, into Ethereum, and less than a year later, he had about $450,000. About a year after that, the company shut down. Story 26. A few years ago, a friend of mine unexpectedly gained a massive estate. He did not know it was coming. He suddenly had unlimited money to do whatever he wanted and travel wherever he wanted. He didn't have a loud personality, so he didn't flash his money, but there were signs. One of those signs was that he would go on vacation a lot. He would fly home more often to see his family. What was once every few months turned into every weekend. Another sign was his pay-it-forward mentality. If you were all out to dinner as a group, he would quietly go to the waiter and pay for everyone. You didn't know he was going to do it, but he just didn't want people to worry about the bill. Sadly, he passed away this year from pancreatic cancer. You can't buy your way out of that. He invested a lot of his money but never truly got to experience the long-term benefits of it. Story 27. I had this substance user friend who would buy junk food and substances on illicit sites. He was an unemployed NEET who had been living off an inheritance for years, burning through it by buying stupid crap online every day and inching closer to coding with every purchase. How did he buy all this stuff online, you ask? With Bitcoin, by buying things off the Silk Road. When was he doing this? Oh, right around 2012, 2013. I'm sure you can see where this is going. The guy became a multi-millionaire overnight using his newfound wealth to get himself clean, moved out of the country, became a hardcore whiskey collector but not a drinker, and is living out the rest of his life doing whatever he wants. He hoarded Bitcoin while it was dirt cheap, so he made an unfathomable amount of money. Story 28. I started leasing a ranch near the Bay Area in California in 1982. It is a little over 2,000 acres and very close to Silicon Valley. Ownership changed hands several times over the years, and I was always able to negotiate a new lease with the new owners. In the late 90s, it was acquired by an investor in Taiwan who also maintained a home in Hillsborough, California. All but one of his children went to Stanford and became MDs. The youngest chose to pursue technology. When he graduated, he had difficulty finding a job. I was an executive at a large tech firm in Palo Alto at the time and managed to give him a valuable role. He is currently the CIO of a large firm on the East Coast. I also completely managed a ranch, dealing with local governments, fish and wildlife, trespassers, and people trying to start illegal farms. Basically, it was a big hassle all the time that my Taiwanese friend did not have to deal with. We would meet once a year at a nice restaurant in San Francisco. I would update him on the goings-on at the ranch and pay my annual lease payment. In 2010, we met and he told me he had stage 4 cancer and would be passing away within the next year. He wanted me to buy the ranch because, of all his many California land investments, this one was the biggest hassle, and he felt his adult children would not have the time or inclination to deal with it. I informed him that it was worth far more than I could ever pay. He sold it to me for an amount of money so small that I was able to write him a check right then. The amount was so small that the title company called the Attorney General's office and they investigated as they assumed something nefarious was going on. I sold it in July of this year for many millions of dollars. Over the years of working together, I had basically come to be considered family. I had helped his son and kept the owner out of the spotlight while dealing with all sorts of problems on the ranch. He valued both of those things and changed my life. Story 29. Throw away because reasons. My ex and I were stuck living together after breaking up, yay, paying rent in the Northeast. He offered to take on the entire electric bill if I let him run a server in the living room. Sure, it wasn't like I could bring dates home with him there anyway. One day, we were both hanging out and I asked him what was on the server. There's this thing called Bitcoin, he said. It's digital cash that works without a bank. Because screw banks, totally anonymous, you can mine it by letting your computer solve problems and it pays you in Bitcoin as a reward. Who knows if it'll catch on, but I like the idea. Cool, I thought. My friends and their partners all thought he was crazy. They made fun of him. He tried to get them into it and show them how to mine even just a few coins. Both of my best friends' then partners flat out banned them from doing it. They called him a conspiracy theorist, a loser, and a dork. But I thought it was kind of awesome. Just seeing how passionate he was about it was contagious. Honestly, I had no idea if Bitcoin would pay off, but I was happy to let him cover the electric bill and watch my friend, who I used to date, get excited about something. About a year later, he supported me through a dating situation that had gone horribly wrong. We got back together in the aftermath, and we got married near the end of 2012. A few years after that, he cashed out. Let's just say we don't worry about money anymore, and that's why my husband gets to be a serial entrepreneur and stay-at-home dad. My friends all regret laughing him off, but for whatever it's worth, I didn't see it coming either. Story 30. A guy in my hometown who worked the registration desk for my doctor's office got to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire when Regis Philbin hosted. He was a nobody before he appeared on the show, an overweight comic book nerd in his 20s who was still living with his parents in a small blue-collar Midwestern town. To everyone's surprise, he won. He got the million, or whatever was left after taxes. He ended up buying a nice new 2-story home all to himself outside of town. He fell in love with a girl who was overly attractive and worked as a nurse at the same hospital where he worked. But when the money dried up, which I imagine took no time at all, even by 1999 standards, his spouse left him and he had to go back to his registration job. He can still be found there to this day, albeit a lot older. Story 31. I had a girlfriend who, on a whim back in 2011, put about $9,000 into BTC. Her dad had given her the money. The total was about $36,000 from her grandmother's estate. The bulk went to pay for the rest of her undergrad degree, and this was supposed to be her mad money. But she had no designs on nice clothes, expensive bags, or taking her boyfriend out to dinner. She liked tech stuff and was enthralled by the idea of cryptocurrency. She had been too broke to risk her money before. I was a little better off, but I was not sold on the idea. More fool me. So yeah, she accumulated something like 1,050 BTC over 2 years when the price was under $10 per BTC. Unfortunately, we were naive kids and neither of us had any concept of just how at risk this really was. She kept it in multiple hot and cold wallets, but she kept the biggest bulk, 300 plus, in a place called Mt. Gox, which promised a degree of safety, but instead pretty much allowed scammers to rip people off at will and had to declare bankruptcy in 2014. She sold another huge chunk, 400, when it hit $160. How she waited that long, I don't know. I would have sold at the first major spike, pocketing about $55,000 in profits. She tucked about 50 into a speculative wallet and started selling the rest as they hit different targets. For a long time, she just held because it was going nowhere. In 2017, she emailed me to let me know she was shedding 120 for over $4,000 each. Another $450,000, give or take. She let go of the last major sell block in, I think, early 2018 at $12,000 per BTC for about $1.35 million. She wiped out her parents' debt and was kind enough truly to wipe my college and credit card debt. Then the tax rules changed a bit and she owed more, but she still had high six figures sitting in her bank and the 50 BTC in the hold till I pass away wallet. She still has those, though I understand she borrows against them here and there. All these years later, we're still friends. She never got married and is really frugal with her money, but she's too generous with the rest of us. When my wife was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at 29, we had crappy insurance because I was just getting my career in banking going and my wife was between jobs. When my ex heard from a mutual friend what was happening, she picked up all of our excess medical bills. So sometimes it is decent people who get really lucky. Story 32. I know a few stories like that. My favorite is about a good buddy of mine who became an expert in a very niche field. I wish I could say what it is, but if I did, he would be discovered. He's one of only 3 experts on this subject in the USA. It has to do with construction, so every time an architect makes a change to the blueprints involving this special component, they need someone like him to sign off on the plans. Because of that, he can basically charge whatever he wants. These 3 experts all know each other and protect one another, often sharing the workload. For example, my buddy might charge $300,000 to sign off on something, then call one of the other experts and say, hey, I'll give you $250,000 to do this job for me. I'd prefer to be on my boat this week instead. He still makes $50,000 for doing nothing but subbing it out. The guy was making so much money that he just took a couple of years off. He even hired another friend of mine and pays him 6 figures just to answer his emails. He's a totally regular, cool guy with a modest house and a regular car, but he has toys. He has a ridiculous boat and he even bought a plane and helicopter because he wanted to get his pilot's license. He spends most of his time at the beach now. Story 33. I know this guy. We used to be kind of friends, but he grew up to be a schmuck who decided not to finish uni. He was ridiculously into the transporter movies, so he got his driver's license instead, bought a small van, and started to transport stuff for literally anyone who paid him. He did transport for bands at small music festivals, delivered parcels, moved construction material, everything, with the obvious rule that he never checked what was in the bag and he never forgot to mention that to his customers. A few months into his business, he was quoted for a cross-country delivery by a big company that had heard about him from one of the bands he worked with that summer. They picked him because he was the cheapest. He got to the location, a big office building in the city center, was loaded up, drove across the country, arrived at another big office building, was unloaded, got his money transferred, and drove back home. The next day, the same company called him again for another cross-country trip. He did that too, and the next one, he drove for this company for a few weeks, same route, same time, same stuff. He wasn't necessarily loaded yet, but he earned decent money from just this one company, so he bought another cheap van and hired his buddy to do other deliveries. When the company heard he had 2 vans, they hired the other one too. By the end of that year, he had 5 vans with 5 drivers doing the same exact route over and over again. Then the company told him that the next delivery would be the last, but not to worry. They already had something lined up for him and his driver, so he wouldn't have to worry about money. He got to the new location, a huge warehouse with dozens of rows of racking and thousands of pallets of stuff. He was told they would eventually move all of it. He asked why they didn't hire a big company with lorries, and they told him they had heard awesome things about him. He was still cheap, and they were not in a rush, so it was a win-win. He just shrugged and started moving stuff from that warehouse to another one across the country. He did that for a good few months, day in and day out, same warehouse, same 4-hour drive there and back with 5 vans. This is when his life changed within 24 hours. One day, on the way across the country, he got a flat on the highway. He pulled over to get it sorted, and the police pulled up behind him to help. They had a friendly chat, changed the tire, he finished the route, got paid, and went home. The very next morning, he got a call from the warehouse guys. He was told that the company had finally decided to hire lorries, as he and his mates were taking too long, so his services would no longer be required. However, they wanted to honor their agreement and pay him for the whole deal in one lump sum plus a bit extra. I'm not sure if he understood what had happened at that moment or only when an exorbitant amount of money landed in his and his mates' bank accounts, but he immediately stopped bragging about this golden opportunity and only spoke about it to a very few people. To this day, we don't know who he worked for, and honestly, we don't even want to. But to understand the scale of things, the money paid into his account was enough for him to buy a small house in the countryside and retire at the age of 28 with enough money so that not just him, but his kids and maybe even his grandkids will never have to work a single day in their lives. Story 34. He was a sound guy at a smallish club, he had wealthy parents, and I don't think he was super stressed about money. He was just coasting along. A band came through and he really liked them, so he became their roadie. The band became semi-famous, and he worked his way up, eventually becoming their manager. He even earned production credits, which gave him a lot of indie cred. Within a couple of years, working became an actual choice, but he continued to do it. Some of the songwriters he represented ended up hitting the lottery in terms of the artists who used their work. Now, he's in the enviable position of making a fraction of a fraction on several mega singles, which turns out to be very lucrative. Story 35. Growing up, one of my neighbors was going through a very rough patch. They were in the scrap dealing business and used to export the metals they sorted. Policies changed, they got cheated, and they ended up shutting down the business. They sold off everything apart from their house and the business license. The neighbor somehow had the foresight to keep making the annual license payments despite the business being closed, and he used to borrow money from my dad to make those payments. Fast forward 2 decades later, the policies changed overnight, the business became extremely lucrative, and everyone rushed to set up new plants and secure licenses. He sold his license, which he had been paying circa $5,000 a year to maintain, for over $2 million. Story 36. I knew an old lad in my town here in Ireland. He was a bit odd. Touched was what we said, but in a good way because he had a cure, really showing how culty I am now, lol. He was a lovely old man you'd always stop and chat with. He lived just along the road from the older, very Irish supermarket that does a great deli. He cultivated roses and had the sweetest little white cat called either Baba Cat or the Rabbit, depending on how bold she was that day. I'm just trying to set a picture here of an old lad in a little town with everyone watching out for him, keeping an eye on him, or popping up with dinner for himself and Baba Cat when he is under the weather. There was one woman from Poland who was living in her friend's box room with her son and working as a hairdresser. She would pop in to see him once a week with a bit of shopping and would cut his hair for him because it was physically difficult for him to get to the barbers, and he liked his hair short because it was less hassle. He had a big head of snow white hair all the years I knew him. This is going back years. I first knew him as a teenager when I moved around the corner from him, and I'm in my 40s now. Worse luck. Anyway, he told me once that he viewed that Polish woman as a daughter and her little lad as his grandson. He told me she'd escaped a cruel family by marrying a cruel man when she was still a teenager. Ireland was her escape, hence her living in a box room with a 10-year-old boy. When he passed, she got everything. She and her son still live there, and she's part owner of one of the best hairdressers in what is now a cosmopolitan big town that's slap bang on the Dublin commuter belt. She's freaking minted. The house alone is worth a fortune due to its location. right across the road from an Aldi and a hospital on the old Dublin Road, 1.5 hours from the city center. Fair play to her, a little bit of kindness goes a long way, guys. Story 37. A friend of a friend went to school for IT management. He worked a few places, but he wasn't very good at the job. He self-admits this, so he kept getting let go. He eventually got a job at a startup tech company as their first IT guy. He was not really needed. It was a tech startup with about 20 employees at the time, so they were all very tech savvy, but when they were doing early investment rounds, it apparently looked good to have an IT team. He played games on his computer all day for about 4 years. Apparently, he could count on one hand the number of actual IT issues he had to work on, and he couldn't solve any of them because the only time they needed him was for super complex issues and he was crap at the job. But it didn't matter because the issues were so complicated that they just chalked it up to that, let him outsource the work and carry on. He really wasn't needed there, and because of that, no one ever realized how bad he was at the job. During those 4 years, he received a normal salary along with the same percentage of pre-IPO stock options that everyone else, mostly software engineers, received. He didn't actually care about them because he didn't think they could ever be worth anything. They eventually got bigger and brought in more people, including more IT staff who quickly realized he wasn't very good at his job and he was exited. However, he was able to keep his options as they had a few years left until they expired. 3 years after he was let go, he wasn't working in IT anymore. He was back in school learning to be an electrician or something when he got a notice from Solium, a corporate shares and options platform. It said his options were expiring soon, so he needed to exercise them or lose them. He looked into it and realized that in the last 3 years, the company had gone public and their share price had shot up quite a lot. He was sitting on tens of thousands of options. He says he made just a little under $3.5 million after taxes and exercise costs. A failed IT guy managed to retire in his early 30s because he got lucky. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.